Blazing Saddles isn't just a movie, it's a miracle that somehow survived its own insanity. It's the film that took everything sacred about Hollywood's golden age, set it on fire, and then roasted beans over the ashes. You might remember it as the cowboy comedy with all the swearing and all the farting. But that's only the surface. Beneath the chaos, Blazing Saddles is a rebellion, a wild, vulgar sermon about racism, power, and the stupidity of human prejudice. But let's be honest, when did you stop watching? Was it when a man punched a horse? When a town full of racists started singing Broadway songs? When a black sheriff rode into town and said, "Excuse me while I whip this out," and half the audience fainted? Or maybe when the characters literally broke through the fourth wall and started fighting on another movie set entirely. Whatever your answer, one thing's certain, this movie doesn't play by any rules. Today we're going to dive into the entire mythos, the real-world madness, the creative battles, the censorship wars, and the bizarre behind-the-scenes legends that made this 1974 explosion of comedy. So grab your saddle, your tin star, and a can of baked beans, because this is the obscure lore of Blazing Saddles. Within the first 5 minutes of Blazing Saddles, you realize you've entered another dimension, one where logic is optional, racism is mocked in public, and the only thing sacred is timing. The movie begins with a song so heroic it could belong in a John Wayne epic, and then immediately cuts to a railroad worker being whipped. It's a gut punch followed by a joke, followed by another joke that somehow makes the gut punch even worse and better at the same time. By the 10-minute mark, you've already seen slapstick, racism, and a man threatened to shoot himself in the face just to get out of work. It's complete madness. And that's exactly what Mel Brooks wanted. In 1974, Hollywood didn't know what to do with this movie. The executives at Warner Brothers thought it would end their careers. One said, "We can't release. Everyone will sue us." Another said, "This is the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life." Both were right. The stakes weren't just high, they were historical. Brooks wasn't just making a parody of westerns, he was detonating them. Every scene mocked something sacred. Old Hollywood myths, racism, authority, even the audience itself. Blazing Saddles didn't ask for permission. It looked the film industry dead in the eye and said, "What if we just make fun of everything?" And so began one of the most dangerous comedies ever made. A film so offensive, so brilliant, and so absolutely fearless that it changed what movies were allowed to be. Before there was Blazing Saddles, there was the myth of the American West, and it was clean. Too clean. For decades, westerns ruled Hollywood. John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, Gary Cooper. They weren't just actors, they were living gods riding through deserts of moral clarity. The West was portrayed as a place of heroes and villains, where good men wore white hats, bad men wore black hats, and nobody, absolutely nobody, broke wind in public. By the late 1960s, that myth was crumbling. America was knee-deep in war, protest, and disillusionment. The country didn't believe in cowboys anymore. The frontier wasn't a symbol of it was a symbol of lies. So when a small group of comedy writers decided to write a Western, they didn't want to celebrate the myth. They wanted to bury it. Enter Andrew Bergman, the original writer, a film professor who thought, what if the new sheriff of a racist town was black? That was the seed. Simple, absurd, and loaded with enough cultural dynamite to blow a hole through Hollywood. He titled his script Tex X, a play on Malcolm X. Warner Brothers bought it but didn't know what to do with it, and that's when they called in a man who specialized in blowing things up. Mel Brooks. Brooks was already the comedy god of the 1970s. He'd made The Producers, a movie about two men trying to profit from a Nazi musical, and somehow, people loved him for it. He had no fear of controversy. In fact, controversy was his favorite playground. When Brooks read the script, he didn't see a Western. He saw a weapon. He brought in two more writers, Norman Steinberg and Richard Pryor. Yes, that Richard Pryor, the poet of profanity himself. The room was chaos. Brooks described it as the funniest, dirtiest, most illegal writer's room in history. Every day was a new argument about what they could get away with. Pryor wanted to push it even further. He'd throw racial slurs into dialogue and then say, "Now make them laugh after it." Brooks, meanwhile, tried to balance the insanity with structure. He didn't want to make a political lecture, he wanted to make people laugh so hard they forgot to be offended. But Warner Bros. Executives were terrified. They said, "You can't say that word." Brooks said, "Of course I can. Yes, that's the point." Originally, Pryor was supposed to play Sheriff Bart. It made sense. He wrote half the dialogue, but Warner Bros. Refused. They were afraid of Pryor's reputation and drug use. Brooks fought for him, but lost. Instead, they cast Cleveland Little, a stage actor with charm, wit, and perfect comedic timing. Pryor told him, "Don't worry, I'll make sure you sound like me." And he did. Every line Little delivered carried Pryor's rhythm, a mix of smooth defiance and lethal timing. Then came Gene Wilder as Jim, the Waco Kid, a drunk gunslinger who shoots faster than his shadow. Wilder wasn't supposed to be in the movie either. Brooks originally cast Gig Young, but on day one, Young collapsed from alcohol withdrawal. Wilder showed up at the last minute, read 2 lines, and Brooks said, "You're hired." And that's how comedy history happens. by accident. With the cast in place, they started filming in the Mojave Desert. The heat was unbearable, the script changed every hour, and nobody knew if this movie was a masterpiece or a hate crime. But everyone agreed on one thing: it was funny. The story itself sounds simple. A corrupt politician tries to destroy a town by appointing a black sheriff, hoping the townspeople will riot. Instead, the sheriff outsmarts everyone and saves the town. But that's not what Blazing Saddles is about. It's about hypocrisy, about how stupid hatred looks when it's exposed under a spotlight. Brooks built the world like a myth. Every character feels like a cartoon demigod of sin or virtue. The villain, Hedley Lamar, not Hetty he keeps reminding people, is the slick, overeducated devil trying to buy his way into power. His sidekick, Taggart, is the muscle, dumb but loyal. Then there's Mongo, the unstoppable brute, who rides into town, punches a horse, and becomes an instant legend. Mongo is chaos incarnate, and yet the audience loves him. That's the genius of Brooks' world. Every villain is ridiculous, and every hero is self-aware. The movie constantly breaks the illusion of storytelling. One moment you're in the Wild West, the next you're on a Hollywood soundstage. It's like the film itself knows it's fake and wants you to laugh at how fake it all is. In one early scene, the black workers are singing a soulful tune, while the white overseers demand them to sing something cowboy-like. They sing Camptown Races, the same racist song that Hollywood used to romanticize. Brooks isn't subtle. He turns the song into a weapon, forcing the audience to see how absurd that old Hollywood fantasy really was. But despite the satire, the film isn't mean-spirited. It's self-aware chaos. When Sheriff Bart rides into Rock Ridge, the people's reaction, shock, horror, fainting, is so exaggerated it becomes a parody of racism itself. The town literally can't process a black man in a position of power. That's the joke. Brooks didn't want people to feel comfortable. He wanted them to confront how ridiculous bigotry sounds when spoken out. The writing process mirrored the chaos on screen. Pryor kept adding new lines, Wilder kept improvising. The actors were laughing so hard between takes they had to reshoot scenes. During one session, someone suggested cutting the famous bean fart campfire scene. Brooks said no. If I can get America to laugh at farts and racism in the same movie, I've done my job. The campfire scene became symbolic of the entire film, something natural, something human, something forbidden on screen until Brooks made it funny. It was the breaking of one of Hollywood's oldest taboos. You could show murder, war, and lust, but not flatulence. Brooks thought that was stupid, so he put it in, and audiences howled. When production wrapped, Warner Bros. 6 howled executives were still terrified. They screened it for test audiences expecting outrage. Instead, people were screaming with laughter. One executive said, "Half the audience didn't know whether to be offended or applaud." Brooks replied, "Perfect." The movie would go on to become one of the most successful comedies ever made, grossing more than $100 million, unheard of for the time. It broke open the door for modern satire and redefined what comedy could do. But that's later. For now, imagine Hollywood before this movie, a world full of clean heroes, clean morals, and clean air. Then picture Mel Brooks walking in with a match, a script, and a can of beans. That's how Blazing Saddles began. Not as a Western, but as a rebellion dressed like one. In one of the early interviews, Brooks said, "Comedy is the only way to tell the truth when the truth is too painful to face." Blazing Saddles was that truth, served with slapstick and chaos. It mocked racists, lampooned authority, and even made fun of the audience for laughing. It was a movie that somehow insulted everyone and yet united them in laughter. The legend of Blazing Saddles doesn't begin in Rock Ridge. It begins in a writer's room where three men, Brooks, Pryor, and Bergman, decided to do the impossible, make America laugh at it. And they succeeded. Because before there was anything, before there was Airplane, or Family Guy, or South Park, there was Blazing Saddles, the cosmic explosion that changed comedy forever. If Blazing Saddles had gods, they weren't the ones from Olympus. They were Mel Brooks, Richard Pryor, and Gene Wilder. Each one represented a different cosmic force of comedy: chaos, truth, and calm. Mel Brooks was the god of chaos, a man who believed the only way to deal with evil was to laugh at it until it disappeared. He didn't write movies to be polite. He wrote them to explode in people's. To him, laughter was like dynamite. Every time he used it, something fake or hypocritical went up in flames. Then there was Richard Pryor. The prophet of pain turned into humor. He didn't joke around racism. He joked through it. He could make people laugh about things that normally made them angry or ashamed. His voice cut through comfort like a razor. And even though he didn't get to play Sheriff Bart, his writing bled through every scene, every smirk, every comeback, every line where Bart outsmarts a racist mob. That's Pryor's rhythm. He turned suffering into swagger. And finally, Gene Wilder, the soft-spoken demigod of absurdity. Wilder didn't need to shout or swear. His comedy came from silence, the slow blink, the calm reaction, the quiet after the kick. When everyone else is screaming, Wilder just raises an eyebrow and says something like, "You've got to remember, these are just simple farmers, people of the land, the common clay of the New West, morons." And somehow, that lands harder than any punchline. Together, they were the holy trinity of satire. Brooks brought fire, Pryor brought fury, Wilder brought stillness. The balance created a movie that felt alive, unpredictable, sharp, and dangerous. In a way, their writing sessions were mythological battles. Brooks wanted pure chaos, Pryor wanted social truth, Wilder wanted emotional realism. When they clashed, magic happened. Brooks would say, "Let's make it stupid." Pryor would shout, "Let's make it real." Wilder would quietly add, "Let's make it matter." And that's how the film's tone was born. A roller coaster between insanity and intelligence. You'd laugh at a horse getting punched and then realize the joke was actually about America's history of cruelty. You'd laugh at a drunk gunslinger, then feel something when he says, "I could have been anything, but I just got tired." Brooks didn't invent comedy chaos. He just made it cosmic. He turned fart jokes into political commentary, racial slurs into anti-racist weapons, and slapstick into social critique. That's why Blazing Saddles still feels alive decades later. It's not just funny, it's elemental. The story of Rock Ridge begins like every Western ever made. Dusty town, fearful citizens, and an incoming sheriff who's supposed to save them. Except this time, the sheriff isn't John Wayne. He's a black man named Bart. And that one choice changes everything. The governor, played by Mel Brooks himself, sends Bart to the racist town of Rock Ridge as a joke, hoping the citizens will panic and abandon their homes so a railroad can be built through. It's a cruel plan, a classic Hollywood villain move, but Brooks flips it. The joke isn't on Bart, the joke's on everyone else. When Bart rides into town dressed like a proper lawman, the people stare in horror. They literally stop what they're doing, frozen in disbelief. One woman faints, another screams, a man drops his pie. The town can't believe what it's seeing. And Bart just tips his hat and says, "Howdy." This is where the movie's real genius begins. It doesn't hide its racism behind metaphor. It drags it into the light and makes it ridiculous. The people of Rock Ridge are cartoon-level bigots. They use every slur imaginable, yet the film never lets them feel smart for it. They're dumb, scared, and pathetic. And that's the point. Brooks wanted the audience to see racism for what it really was. Idiotic, not powerful, not menacing, just stupid. So he turned it into a joke so loud it couldn't be ignored. When Bart points a gun at his own head and pretends to be taken hostage just to escape the mob, it's pure satire. He's using the town's prejudice against itself. They're too racist to notice the joke, but the audience sees everything. Then enters Jim, the Waco kid, a fallen legend. He's the only white man in the town who treats Bart like a... He's broken, drunk, and tired of life. When Bart asks why he drinks, Jim says, "Because I shoot with this hand," and his hand trembles uncontrollably. It's funny but also sad. He's the symbol of a dying era of cowboys who can't survive in a world that's changing. Together, Bart and Jim form one of the strangest buddy duos in film history, a black sheriff and a white outlaw teaming up to outsmart an entire racist town. Their chemistry carries the film. They're not trying to be heroes. They're just trying to survive the stupidity around them. And then there's Mongo, the living weapon. He's hired by the villains to destroy Bart, but when Bart outsmarts him with kindness, giving him a candygram instead of a bullet, Mongo switches sides. That's another hidden method. Bart wins not by fighting, but by understanding. Mongo's not evil, he's just used by people dumber than he. Each scene in Rock Ridge feels like a parable, an ancient myth retold through absurd comedy. The townspeople represent ignorance, Bart represents progress. And every time he wins, it's not just for him, it's for every outsider who's ever been underestimated. By the halfway point, Blazing Saddles isn't a Western anymore. It's a full-blown social commentary disguised as the railroad, the town, the politics. It's all a mirror of America, and somehow the mirror is cracking from laughter. Now, if you think the movie itself was wild, the making of it was even wild. Warner Brothers nearly had a collective heart attack trying to... The script broke every rule of Hollywood. It used language no one was supposed to say. It mocked religion, sex, race, politics, and the movie industry itself. Every studio executive had the same reaction. "We can't release this." Mel Brooks told them, "Then don't. But if you do, people will never forget it." During test screenings, Warner Brothers executives sat nervously in the back rows waiting for angry walkouts. Instead, they got the loudest laughter anyone had ever heard in a theater. People were falling out of their seats. Some were crying from laughter. The offensive jokes didn't make people hate the movie. They made people realize how dumb hatred was. Brooks later said, "If you take away the jokes, you take away the truth." That was his philosophy. Comedy wasn't supposed to protect feelings. It was supposed to expose lies. One executive tried to cut the famous bean farts. He said, "It's juvenile." Brooks said, "Exactly." The sound of cowboys farting around a campfire became one of the most iconic moments in film history because it was the first time anyone dared to show something so real, so human, and so hilariously stupid. The censorship battles were constant. Some executives wanted to cut racial slurs. Others wanted to tone down the sexual humor. Brooks refused. He argued that removing the language would make the satire meaningless. "The whole joke," he said, is that stupid people say stupid things. You're not supposed to agree with them, you're supposed to laugh at them. When the final cut was shown to the Warner Brothers board, there was silence. Then one executive leaned forward and said, "We've got a hit." He was right. The movie made millions. It became a legend, the kind of film that no one believed could ever be made again. But it also broke Hollywood's comfort zone. For the first time, a major studio had released a film that mocked its own history. Blazing Saddles didn't just parody westerns, but yet humiliate. It showed that all those noble cowboy tales were built on nonsense and denial. After its release, everyone tried to copy it, but none of them had the same bite. Because Brooks wasn't making fun just for laughs, he was making fun to reveal truth. That's why the humor still worked. Beneath every absurd line, there's honesty. And honesty, no matter how crude, never goes out of style. Just when you think Blazing Saddles can't get any crazier, it breaks the universe. The final act doesn't just end the story, it annihilates. The climactic showdown in Rock Ridge turns into a full-on meta-war. Bart and Jim rally the townspeople, build a fake version of their town as a decoy, and prepare for battle. It's classic Western stuff, until it isn't. When the villains attack, everything unravels. The fight spills out of Rock Ridge and onto the Warner Brothers studio lot. Cowboys are suddenly punching dancers from a musical. Extras are getting thrown into soundstage. A director screams, "Cut!" and gets punched too. It's the collapse of fiction itself and the cinematic apocalypse. Brooks turns the Western inside out. The movie stops pretending to be a story and becomes a commentary on stories. The characters become aware they're in a film and decide to fight their way out of it. It's both hilarious and philosophical. The message is clear, movies are fake, but the ideas behind them are real. When Bart and Jim chase Hedley Lamar through the studio, it's pure chaos. They run through other sets, crash a dance number, and end up in a movie theater watching themselves on screen. It's absurd, but it's also genius. Brooks was showing that Hollywood had been lying to itself for decades, polishing myths instead of facing truth. So he tore the walls down, literally. The West, the studio, the audience, all connected in one big loop of madness. It's a joke that eats itself, and somehow it worked. By the time Bart and Jim ride off into the sunset, they're no longer in a desert. They're in a parking lot. They hop into a limousine and drive away. The perfect ending for a film that refused to stay inside its own world. Brooks wanted to prove that comedy could go anywhere, and not even outside the fourth wall wasn't just broken, it was vaporized. And from that moment on, every meta joke, every self-aware sitcom, every breaking the illusion moment in pop culture owed something to Blaze. Because that ending wasn't just a punchline, it was a declaration. It said, there are no rules. Not for art, not for comedy, not for truth. When Blazing Saddles finally hit theaters in 1974, America didn't know what had just happened. Some people walked out, others couldn't breathe from laughing, and a few just sat there in disbelief, unsure if they had just witnessed a comedy or a social riot in Technicolor. The studio had expected a disaster. What they got instead was a revolution. The critics didn't know how to process it either. Some called it childish, some called it genius, others called it both in the same sentence. One newspaper wrote, "This movie is either the death of westerns or the rebirth of comedy." They were right on both counts. The classic cowboy myth was, and in its place something new was born, the age of fearless parody. For decades, Hollywood had been afraid of offending anyone. Blazing Saddles proved that being offensive wasn't the problem, being dishonest. It was like a purification ritual for the movie, and the kind that starts with a slap, a fart, and a racial slur, and ends with everyone somehow laughing together. Brooks said later, "I wasn't making fun of black people, I was making fun of racists. I just did it so loud they couldn't ignore it." That was the key. The movie didn't mock victims, it mocked stupidity. And it did it so unapologetically that even its harshest critics had to admit it worked. There were attempts to ban it, of course. Some theaters refused to show it. Certain TV networks later tried to censor entire scenes, but by then it was too late. The audience had spoken. People quoted it, rewatched it, shared it, and laughed harder every time. Blazing Saddles wasn't just a film anymore, it was folklore. Over the years, the movie's cultural weight only grew. It became the forbidden artifact that filmmakers whispered about. You couldn't make it again, everyone said. It was too raw, too fearless, too honest, and that's exactly why it became immortal. It opened the door for movies like Airplane, Monty Python's Life of Brian, The Naked Gun, and even modern TV satire like South Park and The Simpsons. They all owe their DNA to Mel Brooks and his band of... Every time you hear a character break the fourth wall, every time a joke mocks power or politics, you're hearing the echo of Blazing Saddles. And yet, underneath all the laughter, there's a strange beauty, because the film's real message wasn't laugh at everything, it was laugh to survive. In a time when America was divided, angry, and unsure of itself, Brooks made a movie that united people, not by agreeing, but by laughing at the absurdity of their disagreements. That's the kind of unity only comedy can build. Blazing Saddles was chaos, yes, but it was purposeful, the kind that burns down lies so the truth can breathe. Like any great myth, Blazing Saddles left behind relics and mysteries, stories whispered through studios, legends told in smoke-filled rooms, and trivia that sounds too strange to be real. Let's dig into them. The first myth, John Wayne. It's said that Mel Brooks offered him a role in the movie, a cameo, where he'd walk into Rockridge, hear a racist joke, and walk right back out. Wayne reportedly read the script, laughed, and said, "I can't do that, but I'll be the first in line to see it." It's the perfect alternate timeline, the Duke almost joining the most anti-Western Western of all time. Then there's the legend of the bean farts. Supposedly, during post-production, the studio begged Brooks to cut it. They said it was too vulgar, too lowbrow. Brooks refused. He said, "If Shakespeare can have skulls and death, I can have beans and gas." And he was right. It became one of the most iconic scenes in film history, a moment so human, so absurd, that it became holy. Another myth involves the character Mongo, played by Alex Karras. Rumor has it, during filming, he actually punched a stunt horse by mistake while trying to fake the hit. No horses were hurt, but the stuntmen refused to stand near him afterward. Mongo became an instant legend both on-screen and off. And then there's Richard Pryor, the ghostwriter who never made it on camera. In some early drafts, the sheriff's name wasn't Bart, it was Black Bart. Pryor thought it was funnier. Brooks agreed but eventually dropped the black to make the joke cleaner. Yet you can still hear Pryor's fingerprints everywhere. His voice echoes through the script, sharp, fearless, and alive. One of the strangest stories is about the film's ending. There was originally a deleted sequence where Bart and Jim ride off into the sky, literally flying away on their horses like demigods. It was meant to symbolize comedy ascending to heaven. Brooks scrapped it at the last minute, saying, "It was too much, even for me." Another Easter egg is the constant wordplay. The villain, Hedy Lamarr, keeps being mistaken for the real-life actress Hedy Lamarr, who actually sued Warner Brothers over it. Brooks sent her flowers and a note that said, "Sorry, Hedy, but the joke stays." She eventually dropped the case. Even the title, Blazing Saddles, hides it. It's a play on blazing guns, but also a cheeky nod to the movie's explosive, and maybe, just maybe, the after effects of all those beans. All these little myths make the movie feel bigger than itself. It's like every piece of production became its own inside joke. Nothing about Blazing Saddles was ordinary. Every accident, every controversy, every rejected scene turned into part of its legend. Over time, fans began treating it like sacred scripture, quoting it, defending it, decoding it. It wasn't just a comedy anymore, it was a cultural artifact, a relic of a world that once dared to laugh at itself without fear. At the heart of Blazing Saddles stands Mel Brooks, part filmmaker, part philosopher, part trickster god. He never set out to make something timeless. He just wanted to make people laugh in a world that had forgotten how. Brooks came from the school of survival. He grew up poor, served in the army, and fought his way through show business with humor as his only weapon. To him, comedy wasn't a luxury, it was armor. That's why Blazing Saddles hits so hard. It's built by someone who knew what it meant to laugh in the face of pain. Brooks believed in two rules: nothing is sacred and everyone is fair game. That's why his comedies feel alive, because they're honest. In Blazing Saddles, he mocked politicians, priests, bigots, and himself. He played the governor as a complete fool, a man so stupid he can barely sign his own name. That's not just a gag. It's Brooks showing the audience what power really looks like when you strip away the illusion. His genius wasn't just in jokes, it was in balance. For every fart joke, there's a line of poetry. For every insult, there's a moment of kindness. He didn't write villains as monsters, he wrote them as idiots. Because to Brooks, the greatest weapon against evil was ridicule. He once said, "If you make them laugh at the devil, you've robbed him of his power." That's exactly what Blazing Saddles. It laughed at hate until hate looked stupid. It mocked fear until fear felt small. Brooks didn't just change comedy, he changed courage. He gave filmmakers permission to take risks. He made the world understand that being funny could also be brave. Decades later, when asked if Blazing Saddles could be made today, Brooks smiled and said, "Of course not. That's why it should be." He wasn't joking. He meant that art should always push limits. That once people start saying, "You can't joke about that," it's time to joke about it. Because if you stop laughing at the darkness, it wins. That's the gospel of Mel Brooks. Comedy as truth, humor as rebellion, laughter as survival. And so, we reach the end of the trail. The dust has settled, the laughter has faded, and somewhere in the distance, a lonely cowboy rides into the sunset. In a limousine, of course. Blazing Saddles wasn't just a Western, it was a mirror. A cracked, dirty, hilarious mirror held up to a country still figuring out what it was. It showed America its reflection. Ugly, loud, beautiful, and absurd. And somehow, everyone laughed. That's what makes it special. It didn't unite people by making them agree. It united them by making them laugh together, even at things that hurt. Because laughter, when it's honest, doesn't divide. It reveals, it heals. It exposes everything fake and leaves behind only what's real. Decades later, the film still feels dangerous, it still shocks, it still offends, and that's a good thing. Because comedy that offends is comedy that matters. It means it's touching something true. Every generation that watches Blazing Saddles finds something new in it, something they weren't ready for before. For some, it's just a funny old movie with cowboys and beans. For others, it's a lesson. A reminder that the best way to fight hate is with humor. When the credits roll and you hear that final song echoing, it's not just an ending. It's a reminder that laughter is power, that truth can be funny, and that the wild, chaotic genius of Mel Brooks built something that still rides tall across the desert of time. So next time you hear someone say, they could never make that movie today, smile, because they're right. And that's the whole point. Blazing Saddles wasn't made to be safe, it was made to be remembered. And it was. And that is the obscure lore of Blazing Saddles.